The results of your work as a filmmaker will depend upon your ability to communicate with your film lab. You can shoot the camera film and make the sound recordings, but only the lab can process these raw materials into the completed film. The people at the lab work with equipment that functions in standardized, programmed cycles. You should plan your work so the lab can process it routinely. Each lab has its own way of doing things, and it's up to you to work within the requirements of the lab you yourself are dealing with. When you submit your film, you should be thinking of any possible misunderstanding of your intentions. Never leave it to the lab to find your mistakes, because after all, it's your film. When submitting work to the lab, be perfectly detailed in your instructions, and never assume anything. Specify what you are submitting and exactly what you want the lab to do with it. Here, the filmmaker has sent in 3 100-foot rolls of ECO, Eastman 7252, for normal processing. She warns that one can probably has a film tear. The film is to be peerless treated and a color one light work print made. Both the original and the work print are to be coated with inked edge numbers. And she wants the original returned to her. When camera film is sent in for processing, the cans should be securely taped shut with labels on the cans themselves. Cans can get separated from boxes. List your name, the specific type of film, footage, and processing instructions. It's also a good idea to shoot a few frames of a card with your name on it at the head of each roll, so the film is permanently identified. It is imperative that any roll of film that was roughly handled and might therefore have a film tear be tagged for special attention. Never put a can of film in a box from another type of film, even if you have relabeled it. Boxes aren't needed at all as far as the lab is concerned. The lab man will log in the cans, and off the film goes for processing. These are color reversal processing machines. The film is pulled through the various tanks of chemical solutions by rollers mounted on racks. A continuous chain drives these rollers equally, and so the film is gently pulled along. When not running film, the machines are threaded up with leader. This is the chemical mixing area. After being okayed, the solutions are pumped into storage tanks. From these storage tanks, they will be fed into the processing machines as needed during a run. Here we'll be seeing the processing of color reversal film, for that is the most commonly shot 8 and 16 millimeter stock. A trial run is first made with a standard control strip. The values of the color patches and the grayscale are determined with a color densitometer. And if everything checks out, then all is ready to start processing film. In the loading room, the film cans are assembled in order for winding onto a reel. Remember when you go to tape a can shut that somebody else is going to have to get that tape off. This, for example, is a case of overkill. And never use cellophane tape. For our purposes of demonstration, all darkroom sequences in this film will be seen in just reduced light, but in reality the lab man must work in total darkness. Each roll is spliced onto the previous one and wound onto a reel. As he is winding, he also carefully feels the edges of the film, checking for any film tears. Any such defect will cause the film to break in the processor. If this happens, the film will be lost. Worst of all, as several hundred feet of film are passing through the machine at a time, if one piece breaks, then somebody else's film will probably also be a goner. This is the roll we saw coming into the lab with a warning, and sure enough, here is a series of broken sprocket holes. The bad footage must be cut out. It's not very pleasant explaining to a client that his film was lost in processing because some other guy's film broke on the same run. The first half of the processing machine is located in a darkroom. The film on the supply reel is spliced onto the end of the leader that runs through the processor, to the take-up reel out in the daylight area. When the temperature is correct, the chemical replenishment valves are turned on and the run is started. This machine processes color reversal stock. That is, the result on the camera film is a normal color image of the scene photographed. However, the easiest way to illustrate color reversal processing is to show the much simpler black and white process. In total darkness, the original latent image is developed to a negative silver image. A bleach solution dissolves away this freshly reduced silver, so now there is only gelatin where there had been silver, but the formerly unexposed silver halides are still intact. Next, the film goes into a clearing solution to rid the emulsion of the bleach, and past a re-exposure lamp to expose all the remaining silver salts. A second developer brings up this exposure to a positive image, a reversal of the original negative. The fixer solution hardens the emulsion, and there is the resultant reversal image. In the color reversal process, the latent image is first developed to a negative black and white silver image in the developer, and then in the stop bath, the image development is halted. Re-exposure is accomplished chemically. Now, out in the daylight section of the processor, the film passes into the color developer, where the silver salts that were just exposed are reduced to silver, and along with this silver, color dyes are formed in the emulsion. In the bleach tank, all the silver from the two developments is dissolved out, so that only the color dyes remain. Any remaining unexposed silver salts are removed in the final fixer solution. After thorough washing, the final color image appears as the film dries in currents of warm air in the dry box. In this machine, the whole process takes about half an hour. The control strip that was included on the load is evaluated as a record of this particular run. And so the processed film is back in the client's can and is ready to be returned if no other lab services have been ordered. As a filmmaker, your original footage is your most precious possession, and it's a good idea to have it protected by a film treatment. This is the peerless film treatment. The film is placed in a vacuum chamber and heated. In this vacuum, the film is exposed to various chemicals that harden and lubricate the film. The film's shrinkage with time is also much reduced. Such a process is far superior to a mere application of a film lubricant to the surface of the film. A black and white work print would be cheapest, but here the filmmaker has ordered a color print. The timer makes out a leader to allow thread-up footage for the printer. Because this is to be just a one-light work print, the timer works quickly and merely examines the film as it passes by him to determine an average exposure to make an acceptable print. At the tail, he splices on another piece of leader to allow handling the film without touching the camera footage. On the printing order, he instructs the printer operator to use the full printer aperture so as to print not only the picture area, but the full width of the film to include the original film's photo edge numbers on the print. Now the film is set up and ready for printing. The printer operator gets the print film out of the stock room, where the film is kept cool for storage. The film is supplied in 1200 and 2000 foot rolls. This is a subtractive color contact printer. It can make scene-by-scene exposure corrections, but cannot make scene-by-scene color corrections. Overall color corrections can be made by adding color filters to the light source. Using a light meter, she adjusts the amount of light to give the proper exposure. This printer uses an exposure scale from light 1 to a maximum of light 22. A normal print of a properly exposed camera original is printed at mid-scale. As most of this original is underexposed, the timer has indicated to print it up at light 14. With the original threaded up and the room light off, the thread up of the print film can begin. She punches a sinkhole in the print film and puts it together with the original's print sink in the aperture and completes the thread up. Before she starts the run, she turns on the compressed air that blows in the aperture to keep out dust. The original is filed, and the print is sent off for processing. After the work print has been processed, both it and the original go to the edge numbering room, for the client has requested that both rolls be coded with ink edge numbers. This is the edge numbering machine. If you have any specific numbers you wish used, check with your lab to see what combinations of letters and numbers they can supply. Here, the client has not specified any preference, so the technician will start numbering with AA0000. After the number block is aligned with the sync on the film, the machine will print consecutive numbers every foot with yellow ink. The process is repeated identically for both the work print and the original. Both rolls done, the tails are checked to be sure the number block didn't skip or jam. final numbers must match frame for frame. While cutting her work print, the filmmaker has decided she wants a freeze frame in one of her scenes. So she sends the camera footage of that scene back to the lab and orders a duplicate of this shot, but with the whole frame incorporated in it. As this dupe is to replace the original in the AB rolls, it must be the same B wind as the camera film. The original is to be printed for 132 frames, and then that frame held for 100 frames. The filmmaker has ensured against error by marking the frame to be held with an X scratched in the emulsion between the sprocket holes. All set for printing, the job goes in for cleaning. In this film cleaning machine, the original is scrubbed clean of dirt and oil by rollers in a bath of solvent. A freeze frame is an optical effect and must be produced on an optical printer. Basically, the optical printer is a camera photographing film as it passes through a projector. This is the camera end of the operation. First, a head sink is punched in the camera film and advanced into the camera aperture. In the projector, the original is threaded up with the print sink in the projector aperture. The exposure is set, and with the camera and the projector locked to the same drive system, the camera shoots the original frame for frame up to the frame to be held. Disengaging the projector from the drive system, the camera photographs the frame in the projector for 100 frames. And there's the client's freeze frame master dupe. But that is only one of the tricks the optical printer can do. Phony slow-motion is achieved by shooting several frames in the camera for each frame advanced in the projector. This is 2-for-1 slow-motion. Shooting fewer frames than pass through the projector results in accelerated motion. This is 1-for-2 action. Running the original through the projector in reverse produces reverse action in the dupe. In bypacking, both the A roll and the B roll, which in this case is a matte, are run through the projector at the same time. If these two rolls were printed as a superimposition, they would be printed as 2 separate runs, resulting in 2 separate exposures. But when they are printed simultaneously, the dark areas in each mask exposure of the other, with this result. When the filmmaker gets her master dupe back from the lab, she can finish cutting her film into the final AB rolls. Now the filmmaker is here to order an answer print. She has brought her AV rolls, mag soundtrack, and timing instructions. The lab man makes out a lab work order for a color reversal, electro-printed sound answer print, to be mounted on a 200-foot reel and can, and her printing rolls are to be returned to her. The timer is the only one in this whole place who is going to carefully examine your film, scene by scene. This is the only truly personal attention you are going to get. He's it. You should do everything you can to make things easy for him. Here, for instance, the timing instructions are nicely prepared. The point of every effect is given in footage frame counts, and effects are given in frames. The instructions for both rolls are listed in order on the same sheet, so the timer doesn't have to deal with more than one sheet at a time. Be sure to tell him exactly what you want done and where. Also specify any weirdness in a shot you do not want corrected, such as a day for night effect. The only thing the timer will do with the mag soundtrack is punch a print sync 26 frames towards the tail from the indicated edit sync to advance the sound for projection. It is best to submit the mag roll to the lab with just the edit sync marked, and let the lab mark the sound advance. The most common fault with out-of-sync answer prints is a mag track with the print sync improperly marked by the filmmaker. The sound department will later use this sync in electro printing the optical track. As the timer goes through the client's instructions, he will be making out a separate cue card for each roll, as each roll will be printed as a separate run. At 13 feet 26 frames, the A roll is to fade in for 32 frames, and the B roll is to fade out in 16 frames. The timer checks the two scenes for the proper printing exposure, and enters this information on the timing cards. This job will be printed on a printer that takes its cues from small metallic adhesive tabs placed on the film itself. In the printer, when a cue passes through the cue sensor mechanism, the printer will perform whatever effects are called for. Here on the B roll, the exposure will fade out for 16 frames. Instead of metallic cues, some labs will cut notches in the film. The printer is cued by a micro switch as the notch passes by. By varying the exposure in printing, scenes of varying densities can be corrected to approximately the same result in the print, but only within limits. When not color correcting, the 22 lights of the exposure scale are each about a quarter of a stop. If a color card is shot, let's say 2 stops underexposed, it can be printed up, but the best print that can be made will not be of top quality. Designating light 10 as the proper exposure for a normal original, here the color card will be printed up in 2 light increments, starting with light 12, light 14, light 16, and light 18. Here the color card was shot 2 stops overexposed, and it will be printed down at light 8, light 6, light 4, and light 2. The lab will do the best it can, but you should know what to expect. Every batch of print film is slightly different, and its characteristics keep changing with age, so the lab must constantly keep testing each film stock being used. With reversal film, color corrections can be easily determined by simply viewing the original through various color compensating filters. This shot, with an overall red cast to it, is viewed through various cyan filters until the proper amount of cyan, red's complement, is found to cancel out the excess red. And so the shot is judged to have an excess of 15 red. In a subtractive color printer, a 15 cyan filter would be added, but this filter would be in place for the entire run and pull 15 red out of every shot. In an additive color printer, there are 3 separate light beams, a red, green, and blue. An equal amount of each produces normal white light, but by varying the amounts of each, the printer can produce whatever color correction is desired for every shot in the film. In our example here, the machine will be cued to reduce the amount of red light by 15. The footage at the tail sync checks out with that listed on the timing instructions. On the printing order, the timer specifies that the sound department will electroprint the soundtrack. As this film requires color corrections, it must be printed on an additive color printer. This is the keyboard for punching out the printer effects tape for each roll. Each time a cue on the film passes through the cue sensor, the printer reacts to the next instruction on the tape, be it a light change, color change, or fade. Most labs can now make automatic fades of 16, 24, 32, 48, 64, and 96 frames. The cueing mechanism on the printer requires a few extra frames after an effect to recycle and be ready for the next effect. So be sure to check with your lab to see what their minimum requirements are. In a subtractive color printer, the exposure scale is covered by 22 lights, but with the additive color printer, the same exposure scale is broken down into 50 lights to allow the subtle control of color. For an exposure of white light, an equal amount of red, green, and blue is used. To make a color correction, the timer punches up a different amount of each. The timing process is now complete, so the picture rolls go to be thoroughly cleaned before printing. Here is the workhorse of today's film lab, the Additive Color Contact Printer. The operator sets the relative amounts of blue, green, and red light to match the characteristics of the print stock he'll be using. He feeds in this job's printer effects tape and sets the fade, cue, and footage counters to 0. At the end of the run, these effects totals must equal those listed on the timing cards, thus indicating that the printer picked up all the cues on the original. This is the light compartment. The white light from the lamp is broken up into the 3 primary colors by filters. Each of these light beams then passes through a light valve that controls the amount of that color in the final exposure. In the back is the shutter that will open and close for fades. It is these light valves and the fader that are controlled by the effects tape. As this is to be a sound print, the aperture used is just the width of the picture, leaving the soundtrack area unexposed. Later, the sound department will add the track. The first printer run is with the A roll. He rewinds the print of the A roll back to heads and threads it up again, this time with the B roll. After the composite print is rewound again to heads, it is ready for the sound department to electroprint the soundtrack. An optical soundtrack can be either printed from a separate soundtrack master or electroprinted, as will be the case here. Electroprinting is the exposure of the soundtrack on the print directly from the magnetic recording. First, the mag track is played back so the technician can set the recording level and adjust the equalization to give the most pleasing sound. Satisfied, he rewinds and puts the print sync, 26 frames retarded from the edit sync, over the playback head. In the darkroom, he loads the print into a magazine and mounts it onto the optical sound recorder. He threads the sync hole that the printer operator punched on the head of the print in the printing aperture. Now the print stock and the mag film are threaded up sync to sync. When the two machines are interlocked and started, a light beam in the sound camera is modulated by a galvanometer that is controlled by the signal from the mag film. This fluctuating light beam exposes the soundtrack on the print. The mag film is put with the printing rolls for return to the client, or they can be stored in the lab's film vault if so requested. In processing optical sound prints, the soundtrack area of the film gets a special chemical application, for the soundtrack has different processing requirements from the picture image. But other than the special treatment of the soundtrack, the processing of print film is basically the same as for the original camera film shown earlier. After the print is screened, it is prepared for delivery to the client according to her instructions. Having received an answer print she likes, the filmmaker now wants 5 release prints. Release print orders are filled by merely cleaning the picture rolls as received from the client, enclosing the printing instructions used for the approved answer print, and then straight off for printing. The assumption is that the original is as it was when last printed. If the filmmaker has made any changes, the job will have to be retimed and new printer tapes punched. The price for release prints is less than for answer prints, so they're not normally screened before shipment. They'll probably just be inspected over glass. So you yourself should inspect all your release prints closely. The materials presented in this film are meant to be only a general guide to understanding a film lab. It is up to you to go talk to the people at your own lab about their way of doing things.